Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Jen's Books. Happy Friday. I hope you've had a fantastic week. This is another one of my Six from the Shelf reviews where I select 6 books seemingly from random from my shelves, but that all actually have something in common. So the books I've selected to this video are books that all play with time in interesting ways. So some of them are about time travel, but more than that, they use time as a narrative device. So hopefully there'll be something here that's something that you fancy reading, or maybe it'll be new to you, or there are books that you've read, in which case I'd love to know what you thought of them. So the first book that I wanted to mention was by the late great Martin Amis, Time's Arrow. So you may be aware of this book. It was published in 1991, so it's been around for a while now. And at the time, I think it was nominated for the Booker Prize at that time. What's really interesting about this book, it's only a slim little novel, is that it takes time and puts it on its head. So instead of running in a linear fashion, time passing forwards, time runs backwards in this book. And I'll be honest, I had this, this was recommended to me from one of my close friends years ago. It couldn't have been that long after actually it came out. And when I tried to read it, I wasn't keen. But reminding myself about it and having a look through it before making this video, I thought, oh my goodness, I really want to read this again, because I think that I'd probably enjoy it so much more now than I did when I read it like 20 years ago. It's so clever, and it's not just about the way that he uses time, it's the way he uses time to make events new and to make us think about them in a new way. And we're not talking about light events here. Martin Amis is telling the story of the Holocaust through the life of a Nazi doctor who has several names in the book. I think he starts off as Todd Friendly, but his actual name is Adilo Unverdorben, as it reveals later on. And the story begins at the moment of this Nazi doctor's death, and then this second kind of being, this kind of second narrator, comes in as a passive observer. So it isn't actually the character telling the story, it's this second entity that's telling this character's story backwards. So it doesn't hold back on the horror of the Holocaust. It doesn't take away from that, but it makes you think about it in a different way, because you know he's now telling tales of a camp where they bring people to life and put them on the road to, you know, good lives, rather than, you know, what actually happened. But it's quite interesting, but it's kind of, it's about the nature of good and evil. It's exploring those events and thinking about the impact of events on people's lives. So it's really, it's not a light book, it's not going to be for everybody, but it's a really interesting one that makes really interesting use of time. I've never read anything else like it. I mean, there are reasons probably. I don't expect it was particularly easy to read, but as I say, it starts with him as an old man dying, and ends with him as a young child, and it follows his life all the way through. So yeah, one, it'd be really interesting to know if anybody's read this. As I say, I've not read this for a long time, but it's always stuck with me. And now, as I say, after having a flick through and looking at it again, I really think it's something I want to reread again in the not too distant future. The next book I wanted to mention was Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. This is a bit of a battered copy here, but this book came out in 2004, and again got nominated for loads of prizes. I think it was shortlisted for the Booker again, and this is the book that you might enjoy if you enjoyed The Sea of Tranquility by Mendelssohn. You might enjoy this one. It's a very sort of similar kind of structure. It's like an onion, and you peel away the levels to get through to the centre, and it takes you across time periods. There's historical stuff, there's sci-fi, it takes you into the future, and it works its way through genres. But so there's sci-fi in there, as I say, there's mystery, there's historical drama, all these different voices that are kind of discordant in many ways, but they're all linked. And the whole idea is thinking about, I suppose, the butterfly effect, really, how one decision or kindness that is made at one point can ripple through the future. So it begins, it's got 6 different narrators over several centuries, and it begins in the 1800s in California with an attorney. Then it moves forward to 1930s to a bisexual composer, then 1970s journalist, then it jumps through to the present time, early 21st century, and then it jumps way into the future to Korea for this sort of sci-fi section. But it's like, as I say, like an onion, and you end up where you began. But a really interesting use of time. And as I say, if you like Charlotte Mendelssohn, A Sea of Tranquility, there is a similar sort of feel to that as this one, in terms of that use of time and sort of jumping through periods and looking at the connections between these characters across the centuries. And it's a love story as well, so there's lots going on there, and it'd be really interesting, as I say, to know if anybody's read this. And it's one that I haven't read for quite a few years, and I'd quite like to revisit to remind myself. There's a film version of it as well, but I read in a review somewhere it said the film is like the aperitif and the book is like the main course. So if you're one of those that always thinks the book is better than the film, it might be worth reading the book. So the next book I wanted to talk about is one that I really did enjoy, and that is the Costa Novel Award winner from 2013, Kate Atkinson's Life After Life, the wonderful Kate Atkinson. And again, this is a really interesting use of time and a book that I really loved. And with some of these books, when I started reading them, I found those changes and those switches in time a little bit jarring. And this book, the opening, I found quite hard actually to read, but it's really wonderful as you go on. There's actually a sequel to this as well that follows the Todd family, which was published in 2015. And that's called A God in Ruins. So if you read this and enjoyed it, there's a sequel there that you can read as well. So the idea is you have a character called Ursula Todd, and she's born in the 1900s to an upper middle class family. And in the first version of her life, she's stillborn, and then the story begins again. And in the second version of her life, something happens that changes that, and her story is told over and over and over again, and it reaches at different points throughout. So at one point she drowns, at one point she falls out of a window, and it reverts back to the beginning. Apparently childhood, very dangerous time, and she also dies of Spanish flu at one point as well. It does get to a point, but where it doesn't go right back to the beginning every time. It starts sort of going back just a little bit in retelling sections, so it doesn't get as frustrating as it sounds. But it's about Ursula, it's about her life, which isn't an easy life. It's about her connections with her family. But it's just such an interesting premise about how small decisions in your life can change them for the better or worse, and how some things can be changed and some things can't. And how you can, that idea of what if, the sliding doors moment, I suppose, what if you change things. But it's nice to say, a historical novel, but it goes through quite a long time period. And this is one that, if I remember rightly, made me sob just a little bit. I'm not crying, you're crying, you're crying. But if you've not read Kate Atkinson before, she's a fantastic writer, and there's a whole back catalogue of stuff to get lost in. And she's got a new collection of short stories coming out shortly as well. So that is one that I did really enjoy. It's a chunky boy. You know how I feel about books that are really long, but it did keep me going, and it's one that I passed on to people to read as well. I really enjoyed it. And as I say, it gives you all the feels. Not always easy to read. She goes through some really difficult things. If there are certain triggers that you find difficult, it might be worth reading up a little bit more on it before you decide to give this one a go. But yeah, it's really cleverly done, and the way she uses time really makes you think about life in a different way, which is what I really enjoyed about it. As I said, these books aren't all about time travel. There are a lot of books out there about time travel that are great, but they're books where the authors use time as a narrative tool to do something different and memorable. And all of these books are books that have stuck with me because of that structure. Some of them I've not, as I say, when I first read Time's Arrow, I didn't love it, I'll be honest, but it always stuck with me because of the inventiveness and the originality of the way that Amos used time to completely refresh those events in history. The next one I wanted to talk about is the most recent book, and it's one that I actually just finished last night, and it's This Is How You Lose the Time War, and it's co-written by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. And this is actually a bit of a novella. It's a bit of a shorter book. And this is one that is about kind of time travel. It's kind of, you have to think about sort of multiverse, and you've got two agents on opposing sides in a war. So you have red and blue, and they're actually pitted against one another. But they're travelling all over time, all over different locations, different worlds, different time periods, some of which are familiar to the readers, some of which aren't. And they start leaving each other little messages. It starts off as kind of a mocking, ha-ha, kind of a, I've beaten you, foiled your plans, to how you meant to weave the time to stop these events happening. Now they're actually going to happen. But over time, these two characters start to fall in love. And when I first started reading this book, I thought, I'm not going to enjoy this. It felt quite sci-fi. I found it quite difficult to pin down. But oh my goodness, by the time I finished it, I couldn't put it down. I absolutely loved it, and it surprised me. It's one of those books, as I say, I read about 20 pages and I thought, I don't know if I'm going to read this. It's really not for me. But by the end of it, again, a little bit of a lump in my throat by the end. And it's so clever. There are so many little elements that just sort of sing. So, for example, one of them, I can't remember which one, whether it's blue or red, likes to go and see different versions of Romeo and Juliet in different multiverse settings, because in some of them it's a tragedy and some it's a comedy, and she likes to go and see whether it's going to be displayed as a tragedy or commentary. And in some versions the characters die, in other times they don't, and that's kind of played out in the book as well. It's kind of sci-fi, far future Romeo and Juliet, and it's also really lyrical and poetic. So if you don't like very poetic language, you might not enjoy this one. But as I say, it won me over. I started off thinking, I'm not sure why there's been so much hype about this book. It's not going to be for me. And I just gulped it down in about 48 hours and just really loved it. So it's one that definitely recommend, and I recommend sort of sticking with it as well, even if at the beginning you think this isn't for me. But if you do like that sort of sci-fi stuff, you might enjoy it more. But if it's a premise that appeals to you, have a go, pick it up. It's not a long read. It won't take long to read. It's only about 150 pages. And as I say, by the end of it, when I finished it last night, I was just like, oh, it was so loved it. Really, really enjoyed it. So two more that I wanted to mention, and these are books that I think I've either passed on to other people or one of them may have disintegrated with tears. I'm not too sure. I'm not a big book crier, but I have a feeling this next one, which I'm going to mention, which I'll put a photo here for, was one that may have been a bit of an emotional roller coaster. And it's The Time Traveller's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger, and it was published in 2003. So it's possibly one you've heard of. It was quite big at the time. It was also been made into I think it was a film or a Netflix series, I'm not sure, but it was adapted as well. So if you've not read the book, you might have seen the adaptation. I haven't seen that. I can't quite work out how it would work, but it's a really interesting idea again. And we have two characters here. At the heart of it, it's a love story between Claire and Henry. And even though Claire meets Henry when she's only a small child, or 7 or 8, and he doesn't meet her till he's 30. So it's you have to get your head around a little bit. Basically, he has this genetic disorder, which means he time travels on his life story, on the thread of his life, unintentionally and with no control. And if he gets stressed, it's more likely to happen. So he jumps all over the place in his lifeline, but along the way he meets Claire, and they sort of have connections throughout her lifeline, and they get married and they have a child as well. So there's a child that also has well, I don't want to give too much away, but it's a bit of a upsetting, sort of an emotional one, especially at the end, and other parts through it as well. It's one of those books that this idea of this disjointed timeline really pays off. And as I say, the narrator switches between Claire and Henry, so you're not always looking through his eyes, sometimes you're looking through her eyes as well. And yeah, it's an interesting idea. So she already knew him really well by the time he met her for the first time. It's really odd, but yeah, it's an interesting book. It really makes you think about relationships, it makes you think about loss, and I'd really love to, as I say, it's probably quite well known. I'd love to know if you read this book, what your thoughts were on it. It's quite a big book as well, in my memory serves correctly, but I know that I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed sort of this roller coaster of their love across the years, across the decades, not necessarily in that order. So that was another one I wanted to mention. The last one is also quite a modern book, and it's The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which I will pop here. This is a book that I found ridiculously plotted, you know, quite exasperating at points to read, but so clever in many respects. And it again uses time travel, but in a very different way. We have a character who one day wakes up, and he's in the grounds of this manor house called Blackheath Manor. He makes his way back to the manor house, and his friends tell him that he's a doctor and his name's Sebastian Bell, but he's really confused, can't even remember his own name, really disorientated. And that night he goes to bed thinking he'll feel better the next day, but when he wakes up, it's the beginning of the day before again. He's stuck in the same day, but this time he's in the body of the butler. And as time goes by, we discover that he's going to have 8 incarnations, and in that time he has to solve the murder of Evelyn Hardcastle, who dies at around 11 o'clock that night. And each time he sort of starts the day again in a different character, he starts picking up pieces of the story and starts to be able to thread it together as to, you know, what actually happened. But the twist of it is, if he can't solve the mystery within the 8 incarnations, he starts again. The whole loop starts again, and then he also finds out there's somebody else who's competing with him, and only one of them can escape the loop. So there's lots of sort of tension throughout, and we also have this opportunity to look at an event through lots of different perspectives, and I found that really fascinating. And as I say, you know, there were times where I found it quite exasperating as well, but so clever, so well thought out. It won the first best novel at the Costa Prize in 2018 as well, so they obviously agreed as well. But yeah, there's a sort of that Agatha Christie mystery feel to it, which I really love. I love that kind of sort of thriller mystery, you know, sort of that in the past 19th century kind of, or beginning of 20th century kind of mystery with that atmosphere. So there's that kind of feel to it as well. But it's also, there's some other force at play as well. So it's a really interesting read, and I'd love to know if you've read it, what your thoughts are, and if you haven't read it, whether it's one that you might give a go. So those are just 6. As I say, there are so many books that use time in interesting ways, but those are ones that have really stuck with me. And sometimes I think it's potentially more because of the originality and the daringness, how brave they are to take on such a unusual premise or concept. But some of those books I've really loved. If I was going to recommend a couple of them, the ones I'd probably recommend the most are the Kate Atkinson, love that, and the one that I finished last night, This Is How You Lose the Time War, which, as I can imagine, could be a bit Marmite for some people, but by the book end I loved it, really loved it. But they're all really interesting novels. So I'd love to know your thoughts on those, just sort of a quick whiz through of some options. Are there any books that you think I might enjoy off the back of those? So let me know, join me in the comments. If you're new to the channel, my name's Jenny. I've set myself a challenge to read 100 books in 2013, which I have smashed. And so some of the videos, some of the content is reviews of the books I'm reading as I read them. Some of them are books from my shelf. Those who've watched my videos before will know I have a problem. I buy way too many books. So there's book hauls along there as well. But it'd be lovely to have you on board. Do like and subscribe, and I shall see you in the comments, and have a fabulous weekend. Take care, everyone.